Welcome all you wonderful people, this is Recipes with Ben. Today, trying a beer. Got a hoppy aroma from the Mosaic. Oh, that's right, this isn't actually our brew day video. This is mistakes I've made while homebrewing. So without further ado, let's get into it. We'll start with this one first, because this kind of inspired that video. This was supposed to be a Cinnamon Toast Crunch IPA, but I made a critical mistake in my brew day, and that was having to do with the lactose. So when it came to add the lactose with 10 minutes left in the boil, I just dumped it straight into the pot. And because I have an electric kettle, what ended up happening is it hit the bottom of the kettle and just burned. And so now instead of this tasting like Cinnamon Toast Crunch, this tastes like burnt toast. And so that sugar, burned in the bottom, sat in the bottom of the thing, and led to the whole batch basically being ruined. Now, this is basically undrinkable. It leaves this very bad residual bitterness. You can't taste anything else when you drink this. I mean, everything else about it looks okay. The color is fine. I was kind of going for this, amberish, from the Munich malt and stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically what happened. I burned the sugar, and that caused major issues with it. So this can also happen if you're using something like extract or other sugars you add to it. So the fix for this mistake is to cut the heat. So if you just cut the heat from either your propane or your electric kettle, that'll actually have not a heating element at the bottom, so it won't burn any of the sugar you add to it. You'll just add it slowly. Another trick that I found that works really, really well is that if you just actually take out some of the hot wort and then switch it around inside like a mason jar or something to dissolve it, and then you can slowly pour that back in. It's already in solution. It's already heated up. And if the heating element is off, you never have a problem. Same thing goes on with extract, right? Extract is just concentrated wort. It's sugary, it's sweet. It'll burn if you hit the bottom of your kettle. So you can do the same thing. So don't do what I did in this case and don't burn your sugar in the bottom of the kettle. So let's get into the next one. Another common mistake for homebrewers is not pitching enough yeast, because you're wanting really good fermentation, so you're looking for the sweet spot. So you can use some calculators online to figure out exactly how much cell you need based on the amount of sugars that you're putting in there. Now, if you underpitch your yeast, they're going to struggle a little bit. They may not be able to outcompete some other microbes that may somehow have gotten into the wort at some point, because you want to give a nice healthy environment for the yeast to eat through all the sugars and basically create an environment that only they can live in. It can also lead to some other off flavors that you may just not want in your beer. But there are some styles of beer that do benefit from stressing the yeast a little bit. And there's a lot of Belgian beers, and they give you kind of a spicy, sometimes phenolic off flavors, or those are desired flavors in that kind of style. You can also overpitch your yeast. So if you add too much yeast, what that can happen is that now you have too much that they'll plow through all the fermentable sugars in there. And then they'll just die off because there's no more food for them, and they'll fall out, which means then they won't be able to consume all the other secondary products that they need to. And this can sometimes lead to something like acetaldehyde as an off flavor, which is like green apple. So the basic thing you want to do is you want to calculate the correct amount of yeast that you want. A lot of the yeast packets that are out there tell you about how many yeast cells per the packet, and you can use a calculator to figure out exactly the yeast count you want. And I'll link down below some websites that have that. The big thing too is that you want to use fresh, young yeast. Look on the back of your yeast packet to see what the expiration date is on them. Sometimes some older yeast is just not going to be as active. So, and if it really comes down to it, you need to just buy an extra packet of yeast, and it won't be a problem. Another thing you can really do to help your yeast is just make a yeast starter. This will help give them a head start to kind of out producing. They'll be able to grow really quickly and just do that. And I have a link to a video on how to make a yeast starter too. Okay, next mistake, and there's a pretty popular viral video out there of this happening. So this is when you don't add the right amount of sugar when you're trying to actually bottle condition your beer. So there's two sides of this again, right? If you add too much sugar, there's problems, and if you add too little sugar, there's other problems. So if you had too much sugar, what can happen is that as the yeast start to reconsume all of that sugar that you've added, such as corn sugar or some really easily fermentable sugar, then they're going to also produce a little bit of ethanol, but also CO2, and that's what you want to carbonate your beer. But too much can happen, and when that happens, it can either create a bottle bomb, where it actually just the bottle can't hold the wort anymore, and the pressure that's being built up in it, and it'll explode out the top. I think this is pretty popular. There's a scene in Breaking Bad that shows this, and he just hears gunshots in his garage. He runs out, and all the beer bottles exploded everywhere. Also, the other thing that if you just get just under below that, which is pretty common, has happened to me a couple times, is that if you had too much sugar, when you go to open it, it's already under pressure. It wasn't enough to pop it, but it will start gushing out, and you'll see your beer just like flowing over the actual bottle, and you lose like half your beer, and it's not carbonated and just kind of bad, especially bad in manners when you have like guests and you're trying to serve them a beer. The other side of that is if you don't add enough sugar, right? So now you're not giving the yeast enough sugar to do that, so they can't produce as much CO2, so it can kind of lead to a flat beer, or it can take a lot longer to bottle condition. So for this, just use a calculator that's out there to calculate exactly how much sugar based on how much beer you have and the style that you're going for. Another big thing for bottle conditioning stuff as well with this is that some beers that age a long time, the yeast has actually fallen out of solution, especially something like a sour that's aged for over a year and a half. If it's been transferred, out of the primary, maybe out of a secondary, into some kind of oak barrel or just a secondary container, they may just not have any yeast. So you need to probably make a little yeast slurry, mix it with some sugar ahead of time so that you can give that yeast a little bit, something to munch on and some more yeast to kind of go in there. And you want a kind of a neutral yeast for that. So something that's pretty popular for that is a champagne yeast. Okay, so the next thing too we're going to talk about is a pretty common mistake is not understanding the difference between sanitation and cleaning your equipment. So these are two separate steps. Typically you clean first and then sanitize next. I think one of the best kind of example and anecdotal stories I've heard about this was, I think it was the owner of Sierra Nevada thought that you could clean with caustic and then clean with acid. And he said, oh, maybe I'll get a super cleaner if I combine the two. But you're just neutralizing getting water, which is still clean but not as good. So if you don't clean your stuff, for example, if you don't clean it right away, you can have, say, let's talk about the mash tun. It's probably the easiest example for this. If you don't clean out the mash tun right away, some of the grain that's stuck in there will get sticky and stick to the inside of your mash tun. It can harden. It can then cause issues. Maybe you have to scrape it off and cause actual physical damage to your fermenter or your kettle or whatever you're having vessel you're in. That would also mean that it would give you a nucleation site for potential bacteria or mold or other things to live on in between your brews, and especially if you're on, say, the after the boil, right, that can lead to issues of getting an infection inside your beer. So a pretty simple thing is just get some kind of food grade cleaner. I like to use PBW. Use it hot, between 130, 100 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Let that soak for an hour. Run it through your stuff, and then just rinse it out with hot water afterwards, maybe 1 or 2 times, and then it should be good to go. So the next thing after cleaning is sanitizing your equipment. So for that, really good food grade sanitizer is Star San. There's lots of other ones out there too, but I think Star San is one of the best. It's no rinse. It's a dilute phosphoric acid solution. It's used all the time. If you don't sanitize, let's say your fermenter before you put beer in it, there could be other microbes on there, so bacteria or molds or other things that are already growing in there. Then you're just waiting for some kind of food source to hit them. And you throw in your wort, and now you're having those microbes trying to compete with your beer, with your yeast for the sugars that are in there. So what you just want to do is just sanitize it before you put anything in it. Kind of a good rule of thumb is that you want to sanitize anything after you boil it. So that whether it be a brew spoon or some kind of thing you're taking a measurement, or if you're adding ingredients into that, they need to be sterilized. Another really good thing to really help with that is just having what I like to do is, I got this tip from Flora Brewing, and you just use a spray bottle so that you can fill that with Star San and spray on any surface, and it's really easy. You can sanitize a spoon or a spigot where you're getting liquid out. Another good one that's kind of a mistake that I used to make a lot when I first started, and that was just not taking notes on brew day. So when you're brewing on brew day, If you don't record, say, the most important things, which I would include as the amount of grain, the amount of hops, when you add your hops, how much wort you got out, your original gravity, your final gravity, and things like that, then if you try to go reproduce that beer, say it turns out great, right? You bring it all the way, you bottle it or keg it or package it whatever you want. And you're like, this is amazing. You share it with your friends. And now say 6 months down the road, and you're like, okay, I want to remake that beer. If you didn't record anything, you're just going off a gut. And that can lead to mistakes. Also, by recording all your information, it allows you to have consistency from batch to batch to batch. So my solution for that is basically either two ways. There's some free brewing software out there that you can record it on, or some paid ones. Or I just like to use an Excel sheet where I just record all that information, copy and paste it over, know what I'm doing. You can, and that's the kind of information. The main thing too with like those kind of stuff is having an original final gravity is really important numbers, because truthfully, if anyone asks, like, the number one question you're probably going to get about your beer is A, what is it? Or B, what's the alcohol? By having those two numbers, you can tell them what the alcohol is. Now, also having these numbers will really help with you as you try to, again, getting consistency. So from batch to batch to batch, it'll help you understand like your efficiency of your actual mash, efficiency of your brew, the whole brew day, the brew house efficiency, and things like that. For me, when I first started brewing, I didn't do any of this because I just went down to the homebrew store. I bought a kit, just assumed that everything went well, and brewed the beer that I had. And I assumed I didn't take any notes, and it came down to I took some time off. I lost all those notes that I ever had, and I couldn't brew any of those beers again. So I just kind of lost knowledge and lost recipes that I brewed over the history. It's a pretty classic saying in brewing that bad water will lead to bad beer. So if it doesn't taste good when you drink it, you probably don't want to use it for beer, because beer is 90% water. So I've experienced this, firsthand. When I first, moved from one apartment to the next, and I brewed a batch of beer, and that beer, it had this weird kind of metallic off flavor, and it was because there was rust in our pipes, and so it just meant that the whole batch of beer was just undrinkable because it had this really bad off flavor that came from the water. There's like two solutions to this. So either you can get a really good filter system, and filter your water before use. The big thing you want to do if you do that is you want to dechlorinate it. You can let that sit overnight, or add some canned towels to help remove the chlorine, because that can cause some off flavors as well, because a lot of tap water is treated with chlorinating agents to make it safe and kill microbes. The other option, which is what I do, is I just buy reverse osmosis water. It's really cheap. You can buy it. You can buy it in bulk at most grocery stores. For me, it's about 33 cents a gallon. So for a small batch of beer, it's only a couple bucks, and I know my water is good. And then I just do water, adjustments by adding my own salts. Now, if you have good water and good filtered water, I really suggest then just finding some website that will test and tell you your mineral content in your water, so you know where you're at in your water, so that you can adjust your profiles if you're trying to make a hoppy beer, or a East Coast IPA versus a West Coast IPA, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so the last mistake we'll talk about is one that I personally made the first time I ever brewed beer, and that's not leaving enough headspace in your fermenter. So you may think that if you brew 5 gallons of beer, a 5-gallon fermenter is perfect for that. And that's not the case, because during active fermentation, as it kicks up and starts to bubble because it traps some of the proteins, blah, 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 and it forms a little thing that's called a Krausen layer. Now, if there's no place for that to go, it's only just going to go out the top. So for me, what happened was brew the batch of beer, went to bed, after pitching the yeast, woke up the next morning to go check on it, and it was bubbling, and it was just exploding all over the floor of my basement. So I then called the homebrew supply store, and I'm like, okay, what do I do at this point? And the only solution I can have at that point was doing a blow-off tube, right? So you attach a tube to the top of that, put that in a bucket of water, so it creates a one-way valve for it, so only the CO2 can escape. Now, that's quite messy. So what you want to do is, if you brew 5 gallons of beer, you want to ferment in a larger vessel. So in that case, I found that a 6.5 gallon fermenter or bigger works perfect. So it gives me 1.5 gallon of headspace inside the fermenter, so I don't have to worry about it overflowing with beer ever again. Now, this also relates back to, say, your kettle or anything else you're doing with liquids. For example, if you have a kettle and you're brewing a 5-gallon batch, you may boil down from, say, 6 or 7 gallons down to 5 gallons at the end. So you need that amount of space, but also realize that as it boils, you need space if it does have, so like say during a protein break, will boil up and over. So you want to have enough space that it can boil up and then collapse back down. So maybe, that's why a lot of times for a 5-gallon batch, people will use a 10-gallon kettle. So that's kind of what you want to do. So the basic idea is you just want to have the correct size vessel for the amount of liquid that you're using. So with all that said, I want to know down below what your biggest mistake you've ever made. If you found any of this helpful, give it a big thumbs up so that we can help each other not make the same mistakes and learn from them so that we can all make great beer. And if you're new to the channel, hit that bell down below so you can subscribe to my channel so I'll keep bringing you new videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.